All right. I think we can start. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're coping with the weather. Everything is okay. So my name is Pierre Chanowski. I'm from the World Bank GFDR unit, and we are going to discuss through that session about Earth observations and how we can make Earth observations work for the most vulnerable. I'm pleased to have today with me. Does that work? No, that don't. Okay, anyway. So we are going to have if you can make that work. We are going to have a panel conversation, and I would like this really to be an active session, and I like you to participate. So I have a great panel with me. If I can make that, yeah, okay. So first of all, so we are going to talk about the Digital Earth partnership, and the Digital Earth is that partnership that we have between the World Bank and the European Space Agencies, but we also open to other partners. So you are going to have an introduction, a video introduction about the partnership, and then we'll open for a panel discussion. And so I would like to introduce you to the panelists right now. So we have Alberto from Indra, a company that's doing a lot of things on Earth observation. We have Alex Chenet, who is from European Space Agency and a representative of ESA at the World Bank. We have Nuala Cowan, my colleague from GFDR unit. We have Philippe Hippolyte from Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team. And we have Andrew Schroeder from Crisis Ready, who is using mobility data to inform crisis preparedness. Okay, that's so. Let's now do the video. So it's going to be a 5 minutes video about the digital Earth partnership itself, and then we will do the panel discussion. Thank you. So yeah.
Hi, my name is Edward Anderson. I'm a senior technology and disaster risk management specialist at the World Bank. It's my pleasure to come to you from Washington today to speak at the Understanding Risk Forum. So I'd like to introduce the Digital Earth Partnership. This is a new program we're launching at the World Bank together with European Space Agency. And the reason why now is because of the need to accelerate action in sustainable development to meet the Sustainable Development Goals of 2030, taking into account the setback of the COVID pandemic and the accelerating climate changes we're facing. We see a need to adopt new technologies and data that can catalyze our transition to go digital and to have green, resilient development.
My name is Alex Chenet. I'm the European Space Agency representative to the World Bank. The European Space Agency, through the Global Development Assistance Program, provides support to the design, implementation, and development of Earth observation products and services. However, in order to generate sustainable adoption of the services, it is necessary to match those developments and the knowledge development activities with capacity building and skills transfer activities. This collaboration has gone through several phases with the objective first to generate awareness, then acceptance, and finally adoption. And the last phase of this partnership is called the Global Development Assistance Program. The main objective of this program is to mainstream the use of Earth observation technologies within operational processes and financing in development banks and therefore at the World Bank. The strength of this partnership between the European Space Agency and the World Bank really resides in the complementarity between, on the one hand, the Earth observation technology expertise of the European Space Agency, and on the other hand, the know-how of the World Bank in terms of organizational change, capacity building, and skill transfer. This combined approach has different implications. First and foremost, in terms of impact, this is only by combining those two sides of the same coin that we'll be able to achieve sustainable adoption of Earth observation technologies in the long term in developing countries. The second implication is that through this combined approach, Earth observation service providers are able to improve the services. This could happen, for example, through the deployment of in-situ data collection campaigns, which will allow them to better calibrate their services or train some new algorithm. And finally, the third implication is that through this collaboration, Earth observation service providers are also better able to understand and to be in direct contact with final users, and therefore have a better understanding of their needs and better address them in the future.
So the Digital Earth Partnership has started building on a long collaboration with the European Space Agency, where they essentially supply new technology and data from space services. And we aim to filter and coordinate demand for these applications, but also complement the organizational change, the reform process that must also be invested in for a sustainable outcome. So we're looking to transfer skills, build capacities, and support reforms in the country level and through our portfolio of projects. So the Digital Earth Partnership is going to focus on scaling and sustaining these new technology and data services. And the strategy to do that is really threefold. We want to invest in digital public goods, both global knowledge, but also actual digital tools, whether it's a training program or a training data set or a schema for data or an image classifier or an application interface. These are all items that can be reused across projects. So by working with global research and digital tools, we aim to make it easier to replicate these solutions. But at the country level, we want to build capacity not only of end users, but to invest in skills transfer that builds an ecosystem, looking at the next generation, working with universities, tech hubs, and startups, and empowering them to be part of the solution, to learn by doing, by having co-creation opportunities. And then the third pillar is to build these partnerships with space technology providers, including with ESA. So having this mechanism to share feedback and share data about what's working and what we need. So we're just launching the program now, but we're basing it on lessons learned of the past. And one of our models for skills building and building capacity is the Resilience Academy, which was launched in Tanzania 4 or 5 years ago. And it really takes geospatial data opportunities that are low cost and available to local bachelor students and trains them by deploying them in World Bank projects on a mass internship kind of program and doing digitization campaigns. They also learn in class. So there are 8 online open modules that they can take, but the industrial placement and that real world experience is also critical to building the ecosystem. So a specific application in Tanzania is where they were able to survey and digitize household flood histories to help calibrate a space data map of inundations and build more effective local impacts and support that community to also report on flood damages when floods occur. So in this way, in situ data, whether it's flood histories or surface soil information or the tree cover and deforestation rates, can inform our flood modeling, our erosion model, our sediment models, many of the critical environmental models that then inform the greater drainage master plan and the urbanization plans of Dar es Salaam. Another challenge is heat stress. Increasingly, we see as cities urbanize and as they deforest, there's an inequality in terms of heat stress at local neighborhoods, where poorer neighborhoods have disparities of up to 6 degrees centigrade compared to leafier green residential areas. The Lancet estimates that 500,000 people a year die from heat stress-related events. So both in Tembisa, South Africa, and Bandung, Indonesia, we've been working with local communities to use in-situ measurements of both outdoor and indoor temperature, combined with satellite-based models of heat stress, to develop various local community awareness campaigns and local planning activities. In South Africa, 100 local residents were mobilized, and they've discussed urban planning applications and the school problem with overheated schools. In Indonesia, sensors were put on motorbikes to help communities plan cooling areas and other interventions. Thank you very much for your attention, and please do get in touch if you want to know more. Our details are on the screen now.
Okay, thank you. So I hope you get the idea. So
hello, my name is Edward Anderson.
So Edward is my boss, by the way. He couldn't be here today, but yeah, I'm acting on his behalf, and you have Alex Chunet, who you saw on the screen as well, who is physically present. So yes, I think you got the idea. So the Digital Earth concept is to so we have all those Earth observations data. So how to bring those satellite data to the people, to the governments, to the communities that need them, and that's the thing I like to discuss today. And I like to start with maybe a question for you, Alberto. So Alberto is from Indra, a company that's doing a lot of interesting innovations on satellite data, and the company is part of the consortium of GDA consortium with the European Space Agency. So, Alberto, in your view and in your position as let's say a data provider, data analytics provider, what do you think is missing in terms of maybe capacity, tools, and access to client in particularly in developing countries for you to do your job better? Yeah, and I'd like to. So it's working.
Okay. So thank you very much for having me here and for inviting. Yeah, regarding to your question, so probably there are several parts of the capacity building aspects that should be covered. So first of all, I mean, we have to improve the communication with the users to better, for them to better understand what are the capacities of the data that we are producing. We have to explain also what are the limitations that Earth observation can have in terms of of providing useful data. Then, secondly, we will need also to work a bit more on the part of generating acceptance of the data. So we need to convince the users that our data is validated, that is useful, that is based on scientific evidence. And also we have to talk about the limitations of this observation data. And finally, we have to help also the users, not only the final users, the client states, but also the World Bank staff, especially in operations, to try to help them integrate our outputs in their workflows. So it's not only to provide a bunch of data that that they may use or may not use, but is to help them to make the use easier the use of the data in the workflows and help them to integrate them in their activities.
Yeah, and so you have a couple of slides. Do you want to provide any comment on those, or you?
If you can go to the third one, it would be nice.
That one?
No, the third one. So there is no third one.
There is no third.
No, it's okay.
So that one actually is pretty good. That's World Settlement Footprint, which has been produced by DLR, so special agency in Germany. It's providing quite accurate global data sets for settlements. And I think that's the kind of, when we are talking about global knowledge and public goods, that's a kind of example of what can be provided through the partnership. But of course, that's a global product, but then you need people to validate and to improve locally. So we've been talking, and Alberto has been talking about data validation and also community mapping. So now I would like to turn over to you, Nuala. So we have been working together basically on figuring out how we could bring the local communities, the government, the tech hubs of the countries to start working on those activities of data validation, of satellite data, of community mapping. So Nuala, if you could share with us a bit of your experience, but also a bit of the challenges that you have been facing in working with those local communities to work with Earth observation. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. So I think what Pierre is referring to is a project that we worked on recently within the team Open Cities Africa. And the model that we used for that was we worked with local implementation teams, in some cases universities, local government, and the project was designed around a problem statement. And very important from the outset was engaging with local stakeholders in developing that problem statement and problem solving it together, not going in with a preconceived notion of how we should approach it. technology is wonderful. All these wonderful gadgets we see, they're fantastic, but they will not solve the problem. They're just one part. So you have to work together to see, okay, what is missing in that and how do I build around it? And we had very good success in working with that. Challenges was, I suppose, the time that a lot of these things take to push out. They're different everywhere. And I think really important at the outset is the engagement with the stakeholders and discussing the problem and understanding it from everybody's different perspective. What data do they want to get from it? It's not necessarily what we want, and we may have to involve other parts. So the technology is less of a challenge, actually, in many ways. It's just getting everybody aligned and to see what everybody wants from that.
Thank you. Any comment on your slide?
Well, I think Edward covered absolutely everything. We're very well aligned. But, you know, this is kind of the part, I suppose, that I most work on in the team, that kind of the human side of this. And I think it's important that, and maybe if you go back to the other one, is that possible?
The first one?
Yeah. You know, so this side of things, that it's not this prescriptive approach to how we do this, that it is, we design this inclusively, that we make sure that, you know, when we are working with communities, it's not a subject, you know, they're not the subject of what we work on, we work with them. Okay, so it's not for, it's with. And that all the while that we do this, we're trying to build local capacity and, you know, in a sustainable way. So working with universities like through the Resilience Academy that Edward mentioned is a really good way of doing that. You're also simultaneously involving the local government, because most of the data that those students collect, it's in coordination with a government department, and that data resides locally on a geo platform. So all these things, you're trying to build something while including all these things with it.
Thank you. So we talked about international partners, the ESA, NASA, the global data providers. We also talked about local stakeholders, the government, the communities on the ground that can do the data collection work, that are the owner of the process. But we also need some interface in between, and our team cannot alone do that interface. And we have an example with the humanitarian OpenStreetMap team that is acting as an interface between the demand and the data from satellites, for instance, and the work on the ground. And I like to invite Philippe to maybe explain to us what has been your experience within the open humanitarian hot, we say hot humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, in particular in the context of the Caribbean, where you are managing projects. So if you could tell us about some of the experience you had coordinating the work of those local implementing partners, and also what you see in terms of maybe, yes, challenges in terms of access to Earth observations and those feedback loop. Thank you.
Thanks, Pierre. So the presence of HOT in the Caribbean came off of what Noella mentioned, Open Cities Africa project, where they take issues within urban areas, and we use mapping to solve some of the problems. Currently, with the help of the Swiss Re Foundation and GFDR, Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, HOT, is working in Jamaica, the Commonwealth of Dominica, and my home country of St. Lucia. And what we look for is, as mentioned, the problem statements. What can mapping solve for these territories? So in doing so, we went down at the community level, at the government level, and then really see what was needed. And joined with local implementing partners and looked at issues such as flooding, both in the high rain intensity, as well as from an urban flooding in the sense of solid waste disposal, improper solid waste disposal, as well as the effect of hurricanes, which the Caribbean is unfortunately known for. So in doing so, we tackle the partnerships with universities and youth groups in different areas, and work with these communities to generate more of a mapping culture. And especially from the open mapping point of view, leveraging OpenStreetMap, we are able to create products and tackle the actual needs of the communities. Right now in St. Lucia, we are having issues mainly for flooding that's happening outside of hurricane events. Christmas of 2013, we had a large flooding event which pretty much affected Christmas itself. And even more recently, on November 6th, we had a very, very high incident of flooding. And then in Dominica, the Commonwealth of Dominica, they still feeling the effects of Hurricane Maria of 2017. And we're working with them and agencies that are tasked with helping that rebuilding effort to provide mapping data from crowdsourced. And then in Jamaica, we're working with the drainage issues that are caused and see the correlation between drainage and solid waste, improper solid waste disposal, and how that affects the flooding and the areas that are immediately around these areas, these drainage systems, and the number of people that it impacts. Again, it's really about getting people to do the work themselves not just for the project, but from a sustainable point of view, and have it proliferate beyond the lifetime of the project, and really stick to the open source and the available resources that we have. Challenges are with getting the people and the tools together. The humanitarian OpenStreetMap team has a tool called a Tasking Manager, and it allows people to do mapping of a certain area, of a certain task, and it keeps that duplication of efforts on the wraps. But it is powered by the resources that it has. So if the imagery is not up to scratch, we're not able to do as much as we'd like. So getting that partnership with Digital Earth is really going to provide a lot of insight in getting better imagery. One thing I always mention about the Caribbean is we do everything on a smaller scale. We have smaller islands, smaller populations, smaller rivers, smaller farms, smaller cities, but the problems are the same size. So the ratio of the effect of the problems to the islands, it's large. And so having a more detailed, more higher resolution imagery instead of 1 kilometer resolution imagery, 30 meter resolution, we need that array, that availability of different tools to work with what we can have in the islands, and just working with Digital Earth, getting their tools of that can avoid cloud of cover with higher passes and better resolution. We're really looking forward to attaining that partnership and see how it can help the Caribbean region.
Thank you, Philippe. Yes, I think the World Bank has been a big supporter of the OpenStreetMap community and organizations like Humanitarian OpenStreetMap Team. And I think it's important to stress that without OpenStreetMap, without those tools that allow collaboration on the ground, we couldn't get most of the data that we need for our projects. So I think it's also important for government to understand that there are tools that can actually be considered as maybe digital public goods that can not only allow data to be shared, but that can also support that collaboration between the different layers of stakeholders. So now I would like to ask Andrew a question. So Andrew is a part of Direct Relief and leading the work of the Crisis Ready team, exploring the use of frontier datasets, mobility data, supporting humanitarian and development projects. So Andrew, if you could tell us about your work specifically on the use of mobility data to inform preparedness and response to disasters. And by the way, so when we are talking about digital Earth, of course, we are talking about Earth observation, we are talking about drones, but we also consider anything that will provide, let's say, an insight on our planet, on how we function. And I think that's also a good example of a different type of data that we can use in disaster risk management. Andrew, over to you.
Thanks, Philippe. Can you go to the slides? Can you go to the slides?
Yeah.
All right, so like Philippe said, I work for Direct Relief, which is an NGO in the health sector that works on healthcare access to medicines globally. And the crisis ready.
Yeah, that one is better.
Oh yeah, this is a much better one. Makes my voice sound much deeper. So the Crisis Ready project is a collaboration between Direct Relief and Harvard Data Science Initiative and researchers through the Harvard School of Public Health and Harvard Medical School around how we apply aggregated mobility data, which is metadata from mobile phones that lets us understand near real-time change in population post-crisis.
You need to speak closer to the mic. Yeah.
Okay. I thought that was what was causing the feedback.
It's better.
Oh, yeah, that's true. I'm close to the speaker. Aggregated metadata from mobile phones, which allows us to look at this real-time population change post-crisis, and then apply that into understanding use cases that are relevant to decision makers of a pretty wide variety around displacement analysis, around resource allocation, around epidemiology. We work with a lot of epidemiologists that are looking at vector disease, that are looking at access to healthcare resources. And so this is one input among many others into helping to solve that problem. The initiation of this project came in the pandemic. So whereas the research into mobility data and its application to a range of humanitarian public health use cases goes back 10, 15 years, if not slightly longer, the pandemic was the moment when the sort of big bang happened on access to this data, where mobile network operators, Facebook, advertising tech providers, people you had never heard of, all began providing this data to government, to others, to healthcare organizations to help understand the movement of the disease, to understand social distancing and other kind of immediate areas of concern at the outset of the pandemic. And one of the things we realized quickly was that nobody really understood this data. I mean, how is it produced? What's the difference between advertising tech mobility data and a mobile network operator? How does Facebook actually give you this mobility data? What are the privacy and ethical protections on this data? At the agency level, literally no one understood this at all. So the role of the research community then came to intermediate that process, to begin. We published an article in the Lancet around going in detail into how this data is produced, and then quickly realized that we needed a network, so that we intermediated the research community with public agencies. So I worked at the time with the governor of California to help inform California, but we had researchers in over a dozen cities, states, informed a number of people at the country level in terms of how to be able to do this work, and quickly then realized from there that emergency management is not that different from public health for the same problem. So convened a group around being able to inform how we actually kind of effectively, safely use this data in post-disaster contexts to help people making resource allocation, displacement decisions, understand situational analysis, etc. Next slide. So, one of the first steps to that was to just publish reports and publish products. So we've been publishing, and you can find these at crisisready.io, a series of situational reports that look specifically at the post-disaster mobility situation, which we then develop partnerships with cities, with multilateral and bilateral aid agencies, with other NGOs, to just help inform the process, and then to cultivate researchers in those in context where disasters are occurring, so that we're ultimately not going to run this out of Harvard forever. The work ought to be done by a network of researchers globally, but where we can support with training and access to resources and all of the kind of capacity development work that has been mentioned by others in other contexts. And just as one example, in the next slide, most recently around, say, Hurricane Ian, which hit southwestern Florida, this look, this was a sudden mass displacement event. So we can look at the rate using Facebook data of the decline and then return of the population. Worked closely with FEMA in this case around being able to determine whether the mortality rate was related in significant ways to the timing of the evacuations. And so this can then feed into a kind of consideration of post-disaster resource needs and evaluate the planning process and the response process that went into these various events. And so a number of the challenges that are related to this are, I've mentioned one, is that the data's novel, and most of the agencies themselves still to this day don't really have a good grasp on how it works. It's privately produced, so we're dependent upon private companies for the provision of the data, and a variety of different private companies that all provide different data products. They're dependent upon the business cycle. So you may have heard that there's been a number of layoffs in the technology community lately. This has actually impacted on data for good programs in fairly significant ways. You may not necessarily see it yet, but behind the scenes, there is significant impact from changes undergoing in the tech industry. There's also heavily regulated mobile network operators that provide access to telecommunications data. So the interplay between telecommunications regulation and private companies has a significant impact on how we're able to actually access data. All of these are fairly distinctive challenges, and they're challenges that have been solved in the Earth observation community in various ways at earlier points. I think that we have a lot to learn in mobility data from the way in which these data access problems have been solved in Earth observation, but we're still in early days. And then to get that back into the right networks to provide kind of community collaboration, signals from this data at the right level, and then maintain privacy, ethics, and all of the other kind of best practices around this becomes really essential. But I think all the ingredients are there for it.
Thank you, Andrew. And if I try to summarize, maybe one key takeaway is, so yes, we have tremendous amount of great data sources, some of them private, but I think what is critical here is for the governments to understand not only what can be what is the value of those data, how they can use them, but also how they are produced and what are the models behind and whether they are sustainable or not. I think it's also a critical element to consider when you start using some of those information. So now I like to turn over to Isa, my colleague Alex, and maybe so Alex Chunet. So the World Bank and Isa had more than a decade of collaboration on how to bring Earth observations to development. So I'd like to ask you, Alex, so what, first of all, why ISA is so much involved into providing through the Global Development Assistance support to development? And what is your expectation on that new Digital Earth partnership? How do you see things going on? Thank you.
Thanks, Pierre. So thank you, everybody, for being here today. And thanks to the speakers and the great interventions. So I think fundamentally and essentially, Digital Earth is a new paradigm in the use of Earth observation and related geospatial data in the decision-making processes and potentially financing. And it's a paradigm that is especially important for the Latin American region, and that it will increasingly become a necessity considering the challenges related to climate change and natural disasters. However, this paradigm and this transition to the Digital Earth paradigm does not naturally occur. It's not something that is just going to happen by itself. It takes a lot of coordination, collaboration between institutions, and an integrated approach. And I think that as an ecosystem and a community, we need to target 5 different dimensions that we could summarize in 5 A's. The availability, accessibility, awareness, acceptance, and adoption. Regarding availability and accessibility of data, of Earth observation data and geospatial data, this has been, I mean, the availability and accessibility of this data has been improving exponentially over the last years, increasing volumes of this data, and the different types of Earth observation data are made available. However, I think there is still a long way to go in making this data available and intelligible and easy to ingest for the final user. One initiative I would like to mention is the Copernicus Center in Panama that is currently in discussion. And this center, which is going to be one of the largest data centers in the region, is going to increase the accessibility to this data and also facilitate exchange of data information, know-how, research, so that this community and the use of this data is really facilitated in the region. So I think it will be a very good step forward in the right direction. Regarding now the awareness, acceptance, and adoption, this is a really tricky bit, and that's something where we need a lot of coordination in our different institutions and the whole ecosystem to work together. And that comes back to the question of Pierre regarding how ESA conceives this. So the European Space Agency has been working with the international financial institutions, so like the World Bank or the Asian Development Bank and Inter-American Development Bank, to promote the use of Earth observation and geospatial data, and basically to support them in the development and implementation of Earth observation products and services. The last iteration of this partnership, which has been going on for more than 10 years, is the Global Development Assistance Program. And through this program, we work with companies such as Indra, and their mission is to develop and implement those new tools for the projects of the international financial institutions and the beneficiary countries. And the objective is for those tools and those services to be adopted. However, just developing the services hoping that they will be adopted on the long term is clearly not enough. And that's why we need to match this work and the work we do with the Digital Earth approach and the Digital Earth Partnership approach, with a focus on organizational change, capacity building, and skills transfer. And it's only by combining the two and also building capacity in those countries in order for them to ingest and adopt those technologies that will really be able to have this long-term adoption of Earth observation technologies, data, and related geospatial data. So that would be my answer to your question.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Alex. So maybe let's try to quickly summarize. So I think we're already seeing some of those gaps or bottlenecks that we want to address. So one might be the cost of access to satellite data. I think it's still quite expensive. Another one would be the capacity on the ground, so from government, communities to absorb and to make sense of the information. So more trainings, more GIS experts in the countries. I think another aspect that we discussed is to understand the different data sources. It might be public data, it might be private data, and that has implication on the way you're going to access, but also sustain maybe your data workflow. I think something that we also discuss is those different tools and platforms that can support collaboration, that can support processing, because we are actually talking about like big data sets. So you need also the computer power, and something that is missing in many countries. So computer power, the right connectivity to access tools like Google Earth Engine, for instance. So, okay, so I think we are on time. We have about 20 minutes actually for questions and answers. So I like to open to the audience. So any question, reaction, remark, or addition? What has been said? Yeah.
Thanks. Oh, mic test. There you go. So I'm Hamish. I'm here representing UNDRR. Thank you for all your work. In past, I was like in academia, and so I've used a lot of the products that are here today, and I know a lot of your work already. I think the main thing that I want to ask is how can you, when we talk about like digital solutions, you have to address this element of uncertainty. And Andrew's already nodding his head because he knows this is a big question, but like, how can you be honest in delivering uncertainty about your knowledge or inference about a certain flood or about population expansion, etc., whilst also making it so that it's likely to be taken up by government agencies or local actors? I think that balance is really difficult because you can lie all you want and say that satellite imagery delivers you X resolution every day when we know flyover times don't permit that, and all sorts of different like uncertainties or also just gaps and things that are not possible. So I think that's a question.
All right, who wants to respond to that? Andrew?
No, you don't want me with two. I mean, one way is to just show your assumptions. So the questions that come back to us on mobility data around this, for instance, are always about the representativeness of the sample. So we're taking a sample of a sample of a sample. There's the true population, there's the population with devices, there's the population that have made it possible to get location data on their devices, and then there's the population that's actually active in a crisis. So that is a subset of a larger population that has bias and uncertainty. You need access to use Facebook. You're using a smartphone. If you're using mobile network operator data, you're more likely to get a broader selection of devices. I mean, we can at the very least build into reporting a metric around what proportion of the population does this represent, and what are the known factors that the sample. We show the population moving anyways, so we're not saying that we're not going to show you kind of the trends as we're able to determine them. We don't usually have access to enough information to be able to actually provide a weighting on that metric, although I don't know how ultimately the changes in the tech community will affect this, but there's been a lot of kind of work in the research community that has influenced some of the tech companies to begin doing their own weighting on data that they have from that's not released publicly around profile data, demographics, etc. So there is, I think, one of the ways is also to just influence the providers of the data so that they can provide better statistical sampling methods, better weighting, etc., and then show the work and make the process of showing those assumptions part of, and then you do with it what you'd like, but you do with it under conditions where we've actually at least given you the assumptions behind it so that you can evaluate it. The rest of that is data literacy, I think. So then building data literacy in the emergency management community, in the public health community, and make sure that when you convey that uncertainty, that people are hearing you and they are interpreting what you're saying correctly. I don't know how that references to the Earth observation folks, but
yeah, voilà.
Yeah, sure. Just wanted to add 2 quick points on this. I think indeed this has probably been a very big challenge for the last few years. But working in the right direction. Before we're transferring literally in the Earth observation, some of the clients were asking for PDF and you were just transferring a map. And now, of course, it's about transferring this map, but also potentially transferring a map of the uncertainty of each pixel, right? But in order to do this and for it to be received by the final user needs to actually have a grasp on what is uncertainty, how do you actually interpret it, and how you combine those 2 outputs, right? So it takes a fair bit of uncertainty literacy on the receiver side, which we definitely need to work on. And I think that the Digital Earth partnership is also about this, right? Now, when we take a pragmatic example of a project that can be implemented by the World Bank, what we're getting increasingly good at is having different, I would say, levels of uncertainty, and not considering that one is bad or the other is good, but considering that they can correspond to different steps of the project. For example, if you just want to start dialogue, you won't need the same level of uncertainty as you will need really to design the infrastructure and plan for the infrastructure on the last step before implementation, right? And so you can therefore use different levels of uncertainty, and we got much better at kind of segmenting which level of uncertainty can be accepted for each step, and then proposing this to the final user or the client.
Anyone else? No? Okay. Other questions? Yes?
Thank you. A good presentation, and I am benefiting from the discussion thus far. My question is, there's an echo. Okay. My question is, for small populations, because I appreciate sampling and population size, all of that's relevant to analyzing big data. So for small populations like islands in the Caribbean, is there utility in providing those services to governments and public authorities? Because to invest in technology, the software, the time of just collecting the data and also analyzing the data, would agencies like Digital Earth and other agencies find it useful and productive to undertake that kind of work for small island states, such as St. Lucia, my home country? Philip, you would appreciate what I'm talking about. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else? And anyone? Sorry on that one. I think, I mean, the question is basically, if I have a small country, a small territory, does that make sense to use satellites? And can I just go to see people and just implement the stuff? So yeah, sorry, you need the mic.
I think Pierre would answer this the same way as I. So I think, of course, it doesn't have to be satellite. So when we talk about digital Earth, there's huge spectrum of technology involved here, from the very complex to the very simple. And I think it's about finding what approach works for you and what suits your capacity and what fits the needs of the program. You know, I know Philip has done a lot of work with drones, which I think in many ways are more practical and more satisfying in a smaller context. So there's that. And so many of these things it doesn't always have to be satellites. Like, I know we're working with a space agency and that's a big part of it. Especially if we're looking, we want to have the temporal side of things, but it's not the be all and end all, of this whole ecosystem. So I would say most definitely yes, but I think sitting down, communicating with you on your needs and discussing what, workflow and what plan works for you, that's what's important.
Philippe?
Yeah, definitely. I support what you mentioned, and I'm glad you brought that point up, because it's something that's always very relevant for our region. I think agencies just have to be very aware that our context is a lot different, and whether they decide to pack products in a way that it's usable and affordable for the smaller governments, smaller territories. And this is not only just in the Caribbean, we have small island developing states all over the world in the Pacific region. This could apply for them as well. And being in the tropics also, it's even more difficult. So yes, I do think that from a large scale point of view, that you have to understand the context of small island developing states, and probably just package things a little differently so it to be not just a one size fits all in that sense.
Yes, and I think it's you can reverse the question. It's how St. Lucia can contribute to digital Earth. Okay, because it's, we need also to understand the how we function as a planet, and how the planet then is going to affect you. And that's also, I think, is an important aspect. So there is one question here and then one here.
Thanks to all the panelists. My question is about the fast changing technologies we're seeing on the one hand, and getting ordinary people out into the field to map their communities on the other. So this is particularly to Philip and Nuala. So I'm aware of humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, haven't interacted very closely, but I know that you guys really pioneered the use of smartphones and open mapping platforms to get people out and mapping their own environment. But technologies have been changing so fast in recent years, with machine learning and huge amounts of data and smartphones changing every year. So I just wondered what are the latest approaches that you guys are taking, and what are you finding is the sweet spot, considering all the new technologies? Are there any new approaches that you guys take to engage ordinary local people on creating information about their own environment? Thank you.
Actually, that's the exciting part of it. HOT is really focused on dealing with the communities that they're working with. We still use paper maps for certain areas that are just internet restricted, and it works for them. From there, you go from scanning and whatnot. But you do find areas that they are up to date with the technology. HOT itself, I mean, has an entire tech department that stays with the new technologies and is constantly evolving and works directly with the communities. And I think the key is really to work with the communities that are involved and create solutions for them. Ivan here, who is, you can see he's already a tech person. He went and fixed the speaker. He's always trying to find new innovative ways of building GPS. Low-cost drones is another aspect. If you have time to talk to him, he builds drones out of bamboo, and they work, and they effectively work for that community. And so we never stop innovating when it comes to that. So that's one of HOT's main aspects of it. The other strong point we have is the validation aspect, where I think you mentioned about getting the information and how true it is. We ensure that we validate information as it comes in, because OpenStreetMap is open, and we keep up with the technology on developing whatever aspects we need. So it's about being relevant and staying up with the communities, whatever level they are.
Just to add on top of that a little bit, I think it's important that, when you've identified what your problem is, that, you look at a workflow, that there is a role for all of the different stakeholders that are part of that community that you're working with. And you may have participation from people that are not super tech savvy. Like, I've worked on a project before where the community volunteers were a mixture of high school kids and their grandparents, basically, because of the timing of how we did this. So we made sure that everybody had a role on the teams that collected data. So there was paper maps. And in many cases, the older members were more kind of consultative, and they were actually going out and doing the introductions at the door. So there's a role for everybody, that even if, the technology part isn't a comfort zone, or it can be an opportunity for people to try something new. But I think, again, it's about kind of that human side of how you design these workflows and identifying points where it can be tech and it can be not tech, and that everybody kind of has a role.
So one question here, and then one there. Yeah, please.
Well, it's not really a question, but it's more of a concern and an observation. I'm from St. Lucia, and what we've had over the years is many initiatives that provide data. So we would get recent areas, recent LiDAR, but what continues to be lacking is the training where persons can interpret and produce products out of the data. So right now, under DVRP, we're obtaining new LiDAR and aerials. What is lacking is the agencies to obtain the training so that they could interpret the data and be able to support informed decision making. So I'm hoping that digital data would enable us to, at least at a larger extent, to obtain that kind of training, because this remains lacking. Whereas, yes, we may have the data, but it cannot support decision making because we cannot interpret the data.
May I respond to that one, actually, because it's a really good introduction to a new project we are going to have in the Caribbean that we are going to call Digital Earth for Resilient Caribbean. And that's funny, because we started with that offering, let's say, access to observations, but throughout our discussions with people like you, but also colleagues, they kept saying, yes, but we need proper GIS units, functioning GIS units in each of those countries to absorb those information. And that's why we decided to have a strong focus on that type of support throughout that activity. So I mean, indeed, that's critical, and I think that needs to be recognized by everyone with managing or implementing those type of projects. Andrew, maybe on that one also? Yeah.
Just one quick comment to your point is that, we talk a lot about capacity building in these meetings. I think there's often a question as to where capacity needs to reside. So do you need a unit inside, of a government entity? Do you need a kind of a private organization that's providing this? Or are there other ways to sort of think about networks that kind of produce the effects of capacity. And I think in various contexts, and it depends on the situation, all of these various strategies make a difference. So in the case of the mobile phone data, we leaned pretty hard on the research community and the idea that there are trained academic researchers throughout the world in all manner of small island developing states to much larger countries that have plenty of capacity to be able to do the analysis, to be able to engage data agreements. There's no effective coordination and tasking structure for them ultimately. There are misaligned incentives. Academics need to publish research papers in order to be able to advance in their careers. So we need to be able to align the things that make academics okay with the things that academics can provide to others. But there are multiple models, and I think we need to kind of break up this idea of capacity so that we focus on the effect that we're trying to accomplish and less on the institutional structure that would define what capacity is.
Thanks. So maybe one last one.
Andrew, I was very impressed by your answer to the uncertainty question, although I think it was an answer to a question that was a little bit different. So I'd like to ask the question that I think that it was an answer to the remote sensing folks here. Uncertainty is one thing, you're not quite sure what's going on in this pixel. Maybe you should be looking at aggregation, but bias is a whole nother. And, you did a great job of identifying the sources of bias and how that replicates down to contributing to answers that might, not be quite right. But where do we have observation bias in remote sensing data where we know the results may not be very accurate? And how do we track that down and communicate it to the end users? Have you thought about bias as separate from uncertainty and how you communicate that?
And maybe also how bias are replicated from one model to the other. And yeah.
So, okay. Are you sure it was you? Yeah. Okay. Thanks for the question. So I think it links back to indeed the question of uncertainty and potentially also getting involved local communities. We have, I think. I think is this one there. Thank you. Thanks, Nola. That's smoother. So we have indeed, I think I would say an oversupply of Earth observation data, which is being underused. And one of the questions is potentially a question of bias and also of us using those global models that have not been calibrated or trained locally, right? Which is an angle to engage with communities and a whole angle also for the capacity building avenue. So I guess part of the answer, at least, is to make sure, and I think that's one of the main challenges for the next few years, that we do have, and we focus really on this scarcity of training data and local in-situ data to calibrate and really train the algorithms locally in order to achieve results with high confidence and really to have outputs, value-added Earth observation-derived products and services that are really calibrated locally. Am I answering to your question or not that much? When you can do that?
Oui. Maybe, yeah. I'm not sure. So we need to wrap up. So maybe that's a follow-up technical question for the lunch. But I like to thank the speakers. Really, I enjoyed that session. I hope you did as well. So thanks a lot. And thanks to the audience as well and to your questions. And just a mention that we'll have a workshop on how to actually what could be a digital Earth concept for the Caribbean on Friday morning. So you're all invited to attend. It will be at the university. And so, yeah, thanks again. We are the Digital Earth Partnership.